Hi, I'm JJ. Welcome. So, I started reading a book for Women in Translation Month, Birth Canal, and it's by D.S. Novita Worry. I hope that's how you pronounce her name. I kind of went down a rabbit hole when I started it, especially when you'll see the tag here. I'm talking about a book, but a novel, but I'm going to be actually making a video on poetry. So there is a quote by a poet in here that she referenced, and it already just, I kind of went down a rabbit hole and I had to look up his poetry and stuff. It's a Serbian poet named Dejan Stojanovic or Stojanovic. I'm not quite sure which one. But what she quoted here says, "My feelings are too loud for words and too shy for the world." And I just really loved that. I don't know, I felt really seen. It resonated me with quite a bit. So since I also haven't read anything from a Serbian author, I went down a rabbit hole and I found a bunch of his poems online. He has a website. I'll put the link down below, or at least the spelling of his name, because all you really had to do was type in his name and you could go to his website, and he had a bunch of poetry available to read. So I read everything that he had available, and then I looked up the poem that quote was from, and I wanted to read it to you today. So it's called Forgotten Home. My feelings are too loud for words and too shy for the world. Read the light and have a dream in your hidden garden, no need for words. The words are but shadows of stories never said, shining from distant kingdoms, reminding you of a forgotten home. Light rays will tell you the story. There is another alphabet whispering from every leaf, singing from every river, shimmering from every sky. And I had already intended to do a poetry tag because I wanted to share some poems from a book that I had gotten and talked about a little bit earlier on one of my videos. I got it at the Detroit Book Fest, and I felt like my deep dive into Serbian poetry made me want to do this video sooner, so I just wanted to share. I read this and loved it. The portraits were, like I showed you earlier, they were phenomenal. And the poetry is just, it's so thoughtful, especially for those who haven't seen that video. It's poetry by young immigrants, and so they're immigrants around the world who were newly immigrated into Canada, and they were asked to tell, write a poem. They wrote the poem in their language, and then it was translated into French, and then now English. And so I just wanted to read a couple. I specifically wanted to read the one that was from the United Arab Emirates. This kid's name was Abdul Al-Wabi. And then the portrait is from a kid from Moldova. His name is Milan Garuda. So the poem is, I abandoned my life in Dubai, so much sacrifice, for some I no longer exist. I start afresh, new friends, new memories, I take off my shoes, I am home. And the artist who did these portraits, it was very beautiful what she had said, and I don't remember if I shared it in the other video because I hadn't read this whole story, but I wanted to make sure I shared it again anyway, just because of how wonderful the idea was. But the kids were asked, now that they're living in Quebec, and they were trying to compare their Canadian, their new identity, to their old one. And so, like, are they like 40% Quebecese or Quebecese, or like, and 60% like their country of origin? Are they like 50-50? Like, how do they count their new identity? And the person who was gathering this book together for them, she said that you're 100% Quebecese. I would assume it's Quebecy with no S because it's French. Quebecy, and 100% other. So your identity has multiplied. It's now 200%. You are rich in both cultures, not torn between two. And I think that's a really good sentiment, but I always wonder, like, if that's how they actually feel. But when the artist did these portraits, she said that she was capturing that moment, or trying to, when the children heard that for the first time and they registered that they are not lesser or half of what they are more complete, they are doubled. And so that's what she was trying to capture when she was doing her portraits, which I think is a fantastic idea. And then the last one that I wanted to share was from South Korea. Yoon Hong Hwan. I'm really bad at pronouncing these, just because I haven't studied any South Korean. So the portrait is actually the same girl who's doing this story, or this poetry. I disembark and shiver. I expected less of a chill. The first bite of snow, such melancholy, unknown in South Korea, where sidewalks don't ice over. Here I fall. I thought these were all so thoughtful. Maybe I'll share a bit more every, like, once a month or something, just because I think they're such beautiful stories, or poems, but like, it is their story. It's how they see their new world, how they see their identity in the new world and stuff. So it says so much in such few words, which is why poetry is amazing. Another one that it reminds me of, these ones are a lot more hopeful, because they're young, and they're still full of hope for belonging, and just being part of that new world. Whereas the poem that it kind of reminds me of, that also deals with immigration, is a fabulous and haunting poem called Home, and that is from Warsan, Shire. I will put the name below. You definitely have to check out that poem. And then another couple of poems, or collections of poetry, that I wanted to share with you are some of my favorites that are probably not, I don't see them talked about a lot. I haven't really scanned the poetry tab for BookTube, but I just wanted to include them just because they're some of my favorites. So this is a collection from Edna St. Vincent Millay. She went by Vincent, which I thought was cool. And I actually was reading her poetry while I was listening to her biography called Savage Beauty. And she was complicated and talented and tortured and like all this stuff. But her poems, she published and won awards when she was a teenager for her poetry. Some of the stuff that she wrote when she was a teenager is just astounding. Like a lot like the stories here, the poems here, with how insightful and deep they are for how young they are. And so a lot of her poems, since she was winning awards and everything, like when she was a kid. And one that you should definitely check out, which once again was published as a teenager, was Renaissance. It's a long one, so I'm not going to read it here. It's several pages in this, but it's definitely worth the read. It was the one that she's most famous for, but she's also wrote a few plays as well, and some sonnets that were also included in this booklet. But I don't know. I think I have a bigger appreciation for her because I was listening to her audiobook as well, and usually, especially if somebody's life is so tumultuous, like hers was, it doesn't usually make you fully appreciate their art because you don't identify with some of their choices and stuff. But it was such a well-written and researched piece of work. Her biography was. In the synopsis, it said, like, this is what, like, her and her sisters and her mother were very close. And they were described as, like, if the March girls, so the Little Women, were dysfunctional, that would be the definition of the Millay family. So she had a mother who actually also, after Vincent got famous for entering a bunch of competitions as a teenager, her mother then kind of almost rode her coattails and produced her own works, and so did one of her younger sisters. So, but anyway, yes, I definitely do suggest reading some of her poetry. The other one that I had to get, it's Paul Laurence Dunbar. He is a fantastic poet. You will definitely have heard of his poem, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which Maya Angelou later wrote in, is the title of her autobiography. So he inspired that title, and she was hugely inspired by him. But he was the son of a newly freed woman. His mom had been enslaved, and he grew up in Ohio. I went and visited the Wright brothers. I did a mini road trip once, and I went to the Wright brothers who made the airplane, and they had a huge exhibit where not only can you visit their house, but then there was this park that you could go to that had a bunch of, like, old bicycles, old automobiles, and the old original airplanes and stuff like that. And in the museum there, they had a whole bunch of stuff from other famous people from Ohio. And so I got one of his selected poems books and a documentary about him. And he, on the other hand, is fascinating, and I respect his poetry even more, having did a little bit of research on him. I just love how interconnected everybody of their era was. Like, he not only knew the Wright brothers and stuff, but also Frederick Douglass, and, like, they're, just how small the world is. But his poetry is definitely worth checking out, especially if you are not familiar with I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And then the last one is probably going to surprise a lot of people. It is a poetry collection from the rapper Tupac. And so the poetry collection is called The Rose That Grew from Concrete, which is my by far my favorite in here, but this actually has a very good collection. And the fun thing about this is it's a copy of his handwriting on one side and then a typed out version of the poem on the other, so that you can read it better. But it's really cool because he has some times where he what I see, and he drew like an eye And so there's like little doodles and stuff. So you get to see a little bit more of how his mind works besides just the beautiful poetry that's found in here. So, you know, like my heart was, so he drew a picture of a heart, and I, like, once again, I see, or I, even if sometimes I, and so he drew the I. He actually had a lot of stuff, very religious oriented stuff. And then I want to read the one that's on the cover, the rose that grew from concrete, and it says autobiography. I can never say this word. Autobiographical. And so he essentially, when I read it, you'll understand. Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proven nature's law is wrong. It learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else seemed to care. And I guess that kind of is a bit kind of like almost the allegory, the parable that Jesus in the Bible used when he was talking about the different ways that seeds grow, and how like some are tossed aside and they're trying to grow amongst thorns and without water and rocks and stuff, and of course they're not expected to grow. You know, nobody's nurturing them. They're not in good soil. They're, you know, left to the elements, and yet he grew, and he's talking about the strength that it takes, that when, you know, life is stacked against you, when everybody is against you, when nobody is expecting you to succeed or be anyone, you still are able to somehow prove them wrong. You grew from the concrete. And I just think that that's beautiful. And this is a very thoughtful collection from somebody that you may not have realized wrote poetry. It's really cool because it also has some photos and stuff throughout of him and his life. And yeah, I read this every once in a while, just kind of thumb through it, and it's really good. I enjoy his thoughts, his the depth, his feelings and emotions, and yeah, I definitely recommend all of these. And another one of my favorites, if you want to go and check it out, it's another very popular one by Camus. It's Albert Camus. It's called Invincible Summer. I'll write all the poems that I mentioned down here that I didn't show. But happy Poetry Thursday.